Hey there. Welcome to The Climate Cycle, a podcast focused on Canada's climate tech ecosystem. In each episode, we sit down with founders building climate solutions right here in Canada to better understand the challenges presented by climate change and what we can do about it. Today, we're talking with Rashmi Prakash. Rashmi is the founder of Aruna Revolution, a sustainable fiber company that's creating more sustainable and more comfortable menstrual pads as their first product to market. I wanted to sit down and talk with Rashmi for two big reasons. First, Aruna hits a really interesting intersection between climate and human health. Their products are more sustainable, able to be fully composted and returned to the soil, but they're also better for you by creating products from natural fibers instead of petrochemicals and other materials that can negatively impact human health. Second, Aruna is far more than the consumer goods brand that they're bringing to market. They're part of an emerging category of companies that are rebuilding and innovating on manufacturing, producing both more sustainable and just better products. In our conversation, we talk about Rashmi's journey from medical engineer to getting into the driver's seat as a startup founder, the lack of innovation and low standards for menstrual products, Aruna's path to scaling up production to a ton of fiber per month, and the challenges in building a hard tech and consumer goods company at the same time. Rashmi, thanks for joining me.
Thank you for having me. I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Me too. Yeah. I kind of first came across Aruna at the Mars Women in Cleantech event earlier this year. You folks won the pitch event there. So I'm really glad we could kind of follow up on that and dive a little bit deeper. So I'd love to maybe just start with a bit about your background. I know you have a degree in electrical engineering and biomedical engineering.
Yeah.
How did you maybe just tell us a bit about, kind of your background and how you got started working on this problem?
Yeah. So I've got 2 degrees, right? I do have a bachelor's degree in electrical engineering with a biomedical option and a master's degree in biomedical engineering. So I consider myself an electrical biomedical engineer now. But yeah, my background, my personal background. So I grew up, I was born in India, grew up in South Wales, moved to Ontario, did my high school there, and then moved out to Vancouver for university. And I think one thing that was quite consistent throughout my time in all of these places is how much I loved exploring nature. I think that, exploring nature, understanding biology, and gardening too have always been things that I've been very interested in. So I think the sustainability aspect of Aruna and my personality come from that. But my dad is an electronics engineer, and so I feel like I've watched. Growing up, I've watched him do a lot of that, fixing really cool equipment, creating things. So I think my engineering side came from him. I would grow up essentially helping him do a lot of his projects and understanding how they worked and asking him a lot of questions about it.
Right.
He was very patient. But yeah, so I think I saw myself combining the two of them. And then the other aspect was just growing up, I saw a lot of my family members and people around me struggling with their health. And so healthcare and health was something that I very quickly got interested in and trying to understand and understanding what was happening and making sense of what was happening around me. And so those 3 combined resulted in me turning into an electrical biomedical engineer that really cared about sustainability. And when I went into the field, I saw how much waste is being generated by the healthcare field. And I think we got a sense of that during the pandemic too, when we saw the massive amount of masks and gloves and all of this being thrown away after a single use. And no one really thinks about where they end up. And during the pandemic, because I was working as a clinical engineer at the hospitals during the pandemic, and I had this realization hey, we're healing one person today, but all of this waste that's being generated is harming billions of people in the future by turning into microplastics, leaching into the water systems and the earth and, kind of everything else associated with that. And so I realized that we needed to do better, and I figured, why not try?
Yeah, that's really cool. No, I think that's such a great perspective to get from working within the kind of medical system and seeing that waste. So how did you kind of make that leap from working in the medical field to what you're doing now at Aruna?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So I think it was a combination of things again, a combination of like, just being interested in the world of entrepreneurship and creating something new and bringing it to life. I had the opportunity to do that in several of the organizations that I worked at where, we went from an idea on a piece of paper to a medical device that was being used by millions of people. And so it was a really interesting journey. So I was very interested in doing that myself. I think one thing that really pushed me into going 100% with Aruna was I felt like everywhere that I worked, I had to compromise. Like people were making decisions that I didn't agree with because, I didn't have any amount of authority at that time. It was like, it was hard to say anything against it. And, people were picking plastic products because it's more economical for them. And, ultimately they would end up in the landfill. So that was an example of one. But other trade-offs that people make are, they're able to create more revenue by creating consumable products as opposed to reusable products. So why don't we make consumable products that end up in the landfill so that they can keep making more money? So I felt like I didn't really have control, and I didn't necessarily feel like it was like a good representation of what I wanted to be doing with healthcare. To be honest, I went into biomedical engineering with like very much like a naive perspective that everything was great. And, I would be going into the field to make things even better, like make super cool, like high tech medical devices. And then I'm in there and I'm like, wait a minute, what do you mean? What do you mean that there's like so many challenges? There's medical devices that are made not off of scientific foundation that are like so embedded into the healthcare field that people aren't willing to like stop using them. There's medical devices that have never been tested on women, that have never been tested on like people of colored skin, of like so many different things. And I'm like, wait, what do you mean all of these medical devices are out there?
Yeah.
And so, yeah, it really, I ended up like having to take a step back and being like, what am I doing here? Like I'm not really doing what I set out to do. And I'm not really feeling like very fulfilled working at these companies because I'm always having to compromise what I care about. So between my interest in entrepreneurship and between that frustration, I kind of decided that it was time to try doing something myself, taking that risk.
Very cool. And so now you founded Aruna Revolution. Could you kind of lay out like what the company does and both I think on the product side, but also the tech side?
So I started Aruna with the intention of improving the standards for menstrual products, menstrual pads specifically. And so when the company first started, we looked at a whole assortment of materials, we looked at a whole assortment of products, and we're like, hey, what should we use to make it better? And so we looked at a whole, as I mentioned, we looked at a whole assortment of materials such as cardboard, fungi, and we just decided none of those worked. We looked for materials that were improving the functionality of it, improving the sustainability of it, and ultimately what we ended up deciding was that we needed to actually create fibers ourselves. Which in retrospect, thinking about it now seems like a crazy idea, but at that time we're like, why not? Like this is what we need to do. Let's do it. And so we ended up kind of going through a number of different projects. And in mid 2022, we started looking at like a whole assortment of products. We looked at things like orange peels, banana peels, like so many different things. And we ended up developing a process to extract fibers from plant-based materials as a result.
Okay.
And so with these fibers, they're essentially just the cellulose in these plants. So cellulose is almost like the foundational structure of like stems and most plants. And so we're able to go and take these plants and extract that cellulose material out of it and use it to create menstrual pads. So Aruna started off as a menstrual product company, but it has now evolved into a fiber tech company. And we're taking these fibers and we're creating menstrual pads with them that are compostable. We're scaling up our process right now. And so we're working towards scaling it up to be able to produce approximately a ton of fiber per month. And with that, we'll be manufacturing approximately 1 million pads per month. But we've realized that these fibers can also be used for various other industries too. So, immediately you would probably think of like diapers and continence, but also medical PPE, all of these other products that are under the subcategory or under the category of hygienic disposable products can actually be replaced and made more sustainable using our fibers.
Gotcha. Okay. And I guess that would be things like probably like bandages and gauze
Hmm.
and things like that. Like anything that's kind of needs to absorb, you could probably
Exactly.
find an application.
Yeah, yeah. And it doesn't just necessarily need to be absorbent. I mean, it could be, but like also like face mask, right? Like acting as a
Right.
barrier. So anything that can be made out of fibers can be made out of our fibers.
Gotcha. Okay. And so I have a ton of questions about the tech and the business, but I think it'd be really helpful to level set on the problem space.
Sure.
So could you just talk to me about like what are the problems with the current products on the market and like the ways of making them?
Absolutely. So there's quite a few problems out there with the current products on the market, on both the health and the sustainability side. So when you look at these products, and again, I'll speak to menstrual pads specifically, but they can quite easily be extrapolated to many of these other products. But menstrual pads on the market, there was a study that recently came out from UC Berkeley about how they contain, lead and arsenic and all of these other heavy metals. Of course, we need to complete studies to understand how these heavy metals interact with the vaginal microbiome and the vagina, and make sure we understand how, if it gets into the body and how it gets into the body.
Right.
But they also contain PFAS and dioxins. And actually, around the time Aruna was incorporated, we actually started seeing quite a few like lawsuits to some of these companies that had PFAS and dioxins that hadn't talked about it. So they contain all of these. And the problem with all of these is that they can negatively interact with the body, but they are also quite often carcinogens. So they could potentially lead to cancer, which again, there's a whole other assortment of problems associated with the screening around ovarian and cervical cancer, but that's another problem in itself. So I'm not solving that problem
Yeah.
right now. But that is the problem when it comes to the health around it. Of course, there hasn't been a lot of innovation when it comes to these menstrual pads either. You just see a lot of people making pads of like different sizes and things, but there hasn't been true innovation when it comes to the functionality of it in quite a few decades. And so the other thing that we realize is we need to do is improve the functionality of it, because if you talk to anyone that uses menstrual products, you'll hear and lots of complaints about how uncomfortable they are, how a lot of the conventional pads on the market result in rashes and infections. And if you don't use them properly, they can also lead to toxic shock syndrome, which could be fatal for people too. So the functionality of it is also very important. And then lastly, of course, the sustainability of it, because a lot of these pads, actually all of the pads currently don't have a disposal plan. They're supposed to end up in landfills. And when they end up in landfills, they're sitting in there for over 500 years. And so like if you think about it, the very first pad that anyone listening to this has ever used is still sitting in landfills today, which is crazy to think about. And it's not just pads, it's diapers from when we were babies. They're the first one that we ever used is still in a landfill somewhere. So that shouldn't be the case. And the other thing that we're starting to see is all of this waste is now not just sitting in landfills, but going into oceans, into rivers, and polluting our water too, which means that there's microplastics ending up in that, which we end up drinking, which is another problem too. What's interesting is how many stories I've heard about people going on vacation to somewhere like warm and tropical and going swimming and ending up with a menstrual product in their mouth or like somewhere around them while they're
No
swimming.
way.
And so it's a really big problem.
Wow. Okay. So it sounds there's kind of the actual health impacts of the materials. There's the end of life.
Mm-hmm.
And then also just the innovation side and comfort and the actual function of these products. And it seems like just a complete lack of innovation kind of on all three for a very long time. Yeah, I was reading something recently about, single use versus reusables, and, reusables have a higher input and all of that. There is a story where the life cycle is higher, but it ignores all the single use stuff just going into the ecosystem and sticking around for 10,000, who knows how long, really.
Absolutely. Yeah. There's pros and cons between the two of them. And I think one of the other things with disposable products is they're more convenient and they're more accessible for people. I think, especially when you look at like menstrual products as the example of reusable products, not everyone is comfortable carrying around a used menstrual product throughout the day and is able to like safely wash them and like, maintain them.
Yeah.
They're also quite expensive to buy. Like each reusable product is upwards of $20 per product. And when you think about how many you would need in just for one menstrual cycle, I think it ends up being quite expensive. But then on the other hand, you're trading the affordability for environmental well-being. So
For sure. Yeah. Could you talk a little bit about the actual materials itself? Because I would imagine that you need to hit some pretty specific technical requirements on those fronts: antibacterial, comfort, absorption, etc. How have you kind of thought about that in developing this new fiber?
That's a great question. So, one thing that we have been lucky to have is access to people that have worked on hygiene products before at different large organizations. And so we've understood how each layer is supposed to perform through them. And so, for example, the top layer, what you want it to do is the moment fluid touches it, you want it to go through very quickly. You don't want it to get absorbed into the top layer because that's when it starts to feel wet. You want it to go straight through and into the absorbent core. And so there are modifications that you can actually make to the top layer in terms of like the way that you put the fibers together that allow for this. So, for example, by combining a specific ratio of hydrophobic and hydrophilic fibers, fibers that absorb water and fibers that don't absorb water, you're able to then create this functionality. And then, you want an absorbent core that retains all the fluid and doesn't actually allow it to go out, for example. So when you sit down on the pad, you don't want it to act like a wet sponge and kind of just have everything come out. You want it to retain that fluid. And so this was actually quite interesting because I was able to use my electrical engineering background a little bit to understand this. There's a component in electrical engineering called a diode. And so this diode only allows electrical current to go through one way.
Okay. Yeah.
So almost like a one-way valve. And so we essentially created a layer that worked like a diode for the pad to make sure that the fluid doesn't go out. It only goes in.
Gotcha.
Absorbent core. We've developed the absorbent core in such a way that it will not only retain the fluid, but distribute the fluid effectively too. And then, of course, the bottom layer, we've made sure that not only is it leak-proof, which is all very important, but it allows for thermal regulation. It's breathable. So by being breathable and thermally regulating, that means the temperatures are lower in this pad, which firstly means that it's more comfortable. You're not feeling like heat developing down there, but also it provides a much less friendly atmosphere for bacteria to breed in.
Right.
So we really had to think about the functionality of all of these layers. And while thinking about the functionality, we also had to make sure that the pad will break down in the compost. And so that in itself was another challenge. But we were lucky to have access to a compost engineer who we've been working with throughout the development of this product to make sure that the product that we're developing actually composts.
That's a lot to integrate into one product, like a lot of different dimensions. I just want to pull on that thread. So compost engineer, what distinguishes compost versus biodegrading, and what were some of the considerations you had to make in actually making this happen?
Yeah. There's a big difference between biodegradable and compostable. And so this was actually something that I found out while starting Aruna, because I had assumed biodegradable and compostable were interchangeable, but very quickly realized that they were not. And you can have a look at like all of these, not just menstrual product brands, but like so many of these other like clean claiming brands where they claim biodegradable, and you'll notice it so much more now. But biodegradable essentially just means that it can be broken down by a microorganism, but there's no guarantee of how long it's going to take to break down, and there's no guarantee that it's going to break down into something that's actually healthy for the soil. So essentially it's like a very underregulated and very greenwashed term.
Yeah.
Whereas compostable is much more regulated. It has to break down within a specific time period. And so most composting standards have that to be either 90 days or 180 days or something. And it has to break down into useful components of soil. And so when you look at a lot of this like branding, you'll see mostly everywhere it claims biodegradable, not compostable. Whereas Aruna pads, we've made sure that it is compostable. And so working with a compost engineer, we learned a lot of different things. There were certain materials that we were told to avoid because these materials tend to contain toxins that will potentially damage the soil if it does break down. So one of the materials that we were actually told to avoid was algae.
Oh,
So
really?
yeah. So I always find that quite interesting because there's a lot of people developing like compostable products out of algae.
Hmm.
So I'm always curious to see how they've like overcome that, or like how they've like extracted those toxins out. We also had to make sure that the products were designed and the fibers were designed in a way that would also compost within this time frame, because if you kind of wound them up too tightly and you made them like too intertwined, then it wouldn't break down within a specific amount of time. So yeah, so there's a
Wow.
lot of engineering that went behind this, which is
Yeah.
why I think unlike a lot of other companies who, you know, incorporate and then they launch the product within a couple of months, we've taken like 3 years to start launching our products.
Yeah, yeah. No, and I guess, yeah, it shows the thought in how you're developing the materials to actually like hit those requirements and not just biodegradables good enough. Related to that, so the actual technology that you developed, so is that the extraction of the fibers from agricultural byproducts, or is it also a component of like how they're then manufactured?
Both.
Okay, cool.
So part of our IP includes the extraction process in itself, and the extraction process both for different components of the pad, because there are certain fibers that we can, or certain processes we can use to extract fibers to make them specific for like our top layer and our distribution layer, whereas there's specific ways we need to create them for our absorbent layer so that the fibers have the properties we need them to have. So, you know, being more absorbent for the absorbent core, for example. And then to take them and turn them into the products, we are also protecting that too. As well as
Mm.
the fibers and their properties that we use to create our products as well. Because we've looked at the fibers in quite a different perspective. Whenever you look at fibers and like fiber companies, they usually have like a source. So there's, for example, a company that's making fibers out of potato. There's a company making fibers out of hemp. Whereas we have become source agnostic in the sense that we don't really care where the fibers are coming from. You know, they can come from corn, canola, hemp. We can take all of that and we can put it through our process, and the fibers that we get at the end are just going to be the cellulose fibers. So we're feedstock agnostic in that sense.
That's super cool. As you were talking there, I was thinking like so many people are looking to agricultural byproducts as a source for different climate solutions, like everything from like biochar to materials. So it's really interesting that you have a source agnostic approach. I'm curious, how do you think about, or how are you thinking about sourcing this biomass and like growing competition for what was once historically kind of just waste?
No, that's a great point. I definitely think that there's going to be competition around this, but at the same time, I think that Canada has a massive supply of it.
Yeah.
And one way that we're going about it is developing relationships with farmers directly. And so we're working with farmers to understand their needs, how they're currently working, and using it as an additional means to add to their income too.
Okay.
So we're making sure that they benefit from this as well. And I think that developing relationships and a community of people that understand what these products have in terms of value is really important for us. So that's the approach that we're taking. But when you look at the numbers, like for example, just the canola industry, I remember reading about this somewhere that just the byproducts from the canola industry is upwards of like 40 million tons.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
So that is like more than enough to supply the world with menstrual products.
Right. Right. Yeah. Fair. Yeah. Yeah. And I guess you probably get like a very like solid yield for this product from a smaller amount of that biomass.
Yeah, absolutely.
So one of the things I find really interesting was when I first heard your pitch at the Mars event, I was like, oh, CPG business. This is really interesting. But it's obviously a lot more than that. But I could see it being really easy for, you know, potential investors or anything like that, kind of writing it off or having a misconception. So do you view it as a CPG brand first? Do you view it as a tech company first? How do you communicate that to folks that you're interacting with?
I love this question so much. I feel like this has been the question of the year. Is it a fiber company, fiber tech company, or is it a CPG company, a menstrual product company? I think my answer has evolved. If you had asked me this at the beginning of the year, I probably wouldn't have been able to articulate this as well. But now I think how I see Aruna is as a fiber tech company with menstrual pads being our go-to-market strategy.
Okay, cool.
So what this means is that we know that the menstrual product market needs innovation. We need customers to be aware of our fibers, and the only way we're going to do that is through a product. People don't go and buy fibers or look up fibers for fun.
Right.
So by starting with the menstrual pad, what we're able to do is put our fibers into menstrual products, demonstrate their value, demonstrate their functionality, demonstrate their sustainability, and develop that customer trust around the Aruna brand. And then use that customer awareness and trust to then become a fiber company that supplies fibers for other types of products. So kind of like Gore-Tex or Intel Inside.
Okay, yeah.
Becoming this brand where when you see Aruna, you know that it's going to have highly functional fibers that are sustainable and not harmful for you. That's how I see Aruna evolving. But the menstrual pads is a go-to-market strategy for us to develop that customer awareness and trust.
Gotcha. Cool. I love that analogy of, Gore-Tex or Intel Inside. It makes a lot of sense. So you're at this really interesting intersection between women's health and climate. I'd love to just hear your thoughts on how you think about that intersection and kind of how you're incorporating it into how you're building Aruna.
Absolutely. I think that there is a deep interconnection, firstly on the level of like human health and environmental health, that I think that companies in the clean tech industry think more about than companies in the health tech industry. And I think there needs to be a big bridge between the two. And I feel like Aruna is, and the products that we're creating, especially the menstrual pad, is going to be a really good demonstration of that. Because when you think about it, environmental health is essentially just our ecosystem, everything around us. If we're damaging, the oxygen that we breathe, the water that we drink, the food systems, ultimately it's going to affect our health.
Yeah, right.
And we're already starting to see that with, these super, super hot summers and kind of the floods, the fires, everything else associated with global warming right now. And that's just going to get worse. So it's really important to recognize that if you want to take care of your health, the best way to do that is by taking care of the environment around you just as much as you take care of your health too. So I think on that level, there's a big correlation, but I think you're right. And specifically when you look at women's health and environmental health, there certainly is a big correlation, especially with technological development and obviously the lack of consideration when it comes to developing a lot of these products. We know that societies that are largely marginalized tend to be more impacted by pollution. And so oftentimes it seems to be the communities that are not actively participating in the cause of all of this
that
tend to be the most affected. And women's health is certainly one of those. And a lack of, a reason for that is largely a lack of representation when it comes to the development and the decision making around these products and policies. And so I think one of the best ways to improve that situation is just to have more representation at the table. And even when it comes to the innovation, like having women-led companies like innovate for products that are, for women's health is really important as well. But at the same time, I think one thing that I tried to avoid doing, especially when it comes to Aruna, is focusing just specifically on women's health, because I think quite often transgender folk are often underrepresented as well. And when it comes to menstrual products, and especially healthcare, like it's so important to be inclusive, because at the end of the day, it has nothing to do with our ability to identify their gender. Like, firstly, that should never be a problem. But what matters is making sure that everyone has equitable access to healthcare. So with Aruna, what you'll see is that we never really make it like a women's health thing. We make it more of like a sustainable health thing.
Gotcha. Interesting. It kind of goes back to how you first got into this, like seeing decisions being made that like didn't make sense, didn't line up with your values, and like, okay,
exactly.
Maybe we like step into the driver's seat on some of these things. And
exactly.
Yeah, very cool. as you were talking about kind of the human health aspect, it got me thinking about kind of the regulatory side of this. And I'm sure you've gotten this question a million times, but I would love to understand, as you've been building this out, like what does the regulation landscape look like for menstrual products, and some of the products that you're exploring, how you're navigating that?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So fortunately, I've had experience navigating the healthcare regulatory field in my other positions that I was at. So I was very aware of all the standards we needed to keep in mind and how we needed to approach them and the regulatory bodies we needed to work with. So Health Canada, the FDA. What really surprised me though was, again, how underregulated menstrual products are. In Canada, menstrual pads are not classified as a medical device. And in the US, they're classified as a class 1 medical device, which essentially just means that as long as you're not using any like novel technology or whatever, you're able to just submit and almost like self-register and submit the information and kind of get your product out in the market. The amount of approval required is so minimal, which is really quite scary and likely why menstrual products have so many challenges associated with them and have been able to get away with containing all of these harmful chemicals. And so I think that was something that was quite scary to us when we found this out. And then tampons have slightly more regulation. They're a slightly higher class device. And, I think that's largely because people saw a lot of deaths associated with the use of tampons around the toxic shock syndrome.
Right. Okay.
And so because of that, I think they became more regulated, but still the regulation around them is not as much as it needs to be. In my opinion, what we've done with Aruna is we've kind of gone ahead and gone above and beyond what is required. So we've subjected it to tests that are beyond what it was required by Health Canada or the FDA, including like dermatological testing. We're working with gynecologists now. We're doing gynecological testing too. And we've made sure that these products are safer than what, the regulations require. But ultimately, I think the regulations for menstrual products need to be at a much, much higher level than they currently are.
Yeah, no, that's really surprising. And all of that testing that you just talked about that you're doing, you'd think you would expect that to be table stakes for for these types of products.
Yeah. There should be a lot of different types of testing that should be mandatory for these products before you even get them out there. But I think, that innovation when it comes to the regulations is still not there, but hopefully soon. There's an international standard being created right now for menstrual products. And so we're participating in that. And hopefully we will be able to improve the quality of menstrual products really soon.
That's really cool. Maybe we'll shift a little bit now and talk about kind of what's coming up in the future. Would love to hear about where you are now in the actual development process for the technology, and then kind of what is the path to scaling up look like? Like you mentioned, kind of you're nearing that point, but I would love to hear what's the path to scale?
Yeah, absolutely. So in terms of where we are, we're actually launching into the market with what we're referring to our V1 pad.
Okay.
We need to come up with a better name for it, but V1 for now. And so this pad is going to be made up of cellulose fibers that we have worked to bring together from our partners. So it's not fibers that we're extracting ourselves. And so with this product, it's still going to be compostable. It's still going to have the health requirements. But in terms of the functionality, it's not going to be as good as if we used our fibers for it. And so we're going to be launching onto the market. It still meets the golden standards for products on the market today. It's very competitive with the products that you see Always and things like that too, in terms of the functionality. But we're just not able to get it to be as functional with our fibers. So our fibers, we've actually been able to increase the absorption quite significantly. With less fibers too. So that means our pads will be thinner too. But so we're launching onto the market with our V1 pads and using the profits from that. We're going to be investing those profits back into our facility and scaling that up. We're also raising for that too right now. So it's going to be a combination of our sales plus the investment that we're using to scale up our facility. In this facility, we're going to be producing approximately a ton of fiber per month that we're going to use to put into our products and create 1 million pads per month. The goal with Aruna is we want to do a couple of different things. So firstly, when it comes to sustainability, we realize that it's unsustainable to be manufacturing our products in Europe like we currently are right now. Okay. And so we're going to be bringing that manufacturing in-house, and we're going to be using the facility that we've got in Europe to service the European market. And in Canada, we're going to be setting up a full manufacturing line to manufacture the products and distribute them throughout Canada and North America. And what we're trying to do is we're working to partner with not-for-profits and government organizations, and we want to develop a community around us so that we can firstly make sure that we're sticking to our sustainability targets and we're held accountable, but also by working and partnering with the government and for not-for-profits, we're also able to increase our impact and make sure that we're able to support everyone in Canada. So we're able to support, the most vulnerable populations all the way to the people that are able to purchase our products, because obviously we're at a small scale right now, so we're not able to bring it down to the cost that we need it to be. And so by working with not-for-profits and the government, we're able to use their support to provide our products to all of these other individuals too. And then obviously the goal is we scale up our manufacturing facility and get to cost effectiveness and bring down the unit economics, is to make sure that our pricing is competitive with what's on the market already. So things like Always, and potentially even make them more affordable, fingers crossed.
Yeah, very cool. And on that kind of economies of scale and bringing down pricing, what are some of the big bottlenecks that you're looking at? Like, is it really just scale of production? Are there other things that need to kind of be, bottlenecks or milestones that need to be figured out there?
Yeah, I think the biggest one is actually just scaling up our fiber extraction process. One of the challenges that we faced is that because our process is quite novel, we're not able to outsource that. And so what that means is that that's one of the biggest reasons why we're setting up our own manufacturing facility for the fiber extraction, so that we're able to scale that up and extract the fibers. So the good thing is that we've figured out a process where we're able to use off-the-shelf equipment. So we're not having to custom make equipment, which is going to decrease the capital cost for sure. But there's still bringing them in, setting them up, making sure that the electrical, the mechanical infrastructures are up and running properly. So there still are those overhead costs, but it's just going to be cheaper than customizing the equipment.
Gotcha. That makes a lot of sense. And then you were talking about the consumer product as the go-to-market strategy. This seems like a really interesting place where you're kind of split between, I would imagine on like any given day or week, split between like building a tech business and how do you sell these products to consumers and to like B2B and all of that. If you could tell us a bit about like how you're building out that kind of, whether it's B2B or like those sales channels for that side of it.
Yeah, absolutely. So when it comes to the company structure, we essentially have like an R&D engineering team, and then we have like a marketing and sales team. The marketing and sales team, their main function is to bring in customers and get information across about what we're building. The R&D team, their focus is to scale up our fiber extraction.
Right.
But there definitely is a lot of overlap in the sense that, part of our R&D team has to work with the manufacturers that are making these pads. But there's a process in which, in order to get to the pads, we need to do the fibers first. And so in that sense, all of our R&D team's focus is on the fiber extraction. In terms of our sales, we're focused right now. We're lucky enough that we've gotten quite a lot of like organic reach outs to us. So we've had individuals and businesses reaching out to us to ask to supply our pads to their employees, to their students, to their community. We've also had a lot of support from the government, which is great too, in terms of getting our product out. They've made a lot of connections for us. And I think there's a lot of individuals like already starting to search for this too, because we've been getting a lot of like people reaching out to us and being like, hey, when can we buy this?
Right.
So we're lucky in that sense, but I think moving forward, we're going to be quite strategic with who we target for this. And a lot of it has to do with making sure that there's alignment in what we're doing. So organizations that have a sustainability policy and sustainability focus are going to be our initial target, because they already are looking for this, and they will likely already have the need to start getting these products and put them into bathroom. There's a federal mandate that federally regulated employers need to provide menstrual products in their bathrooms. And so, when I first read this, I thought this just meant federal government buildings, but it actually doesn't. There's a whole assortment of other businesses that also need to provide menstrual products, all the way from like banks, airlines, like it's quite a big list of them. And so we're kind of looking at those types of businesses and getting the sustainability alignment. But when it comes to like them understanding the value of our product, that happens quite quickly. At the moment people understand the impact that they're having with the products that they're choosing and the value that we bring and, the impact that they will have by not choosing those products and choosing ours, they understand it very quickly. And then the next thing is then to convince them of the value when it comes to the cost of the products too.
Right.
Because right now, obviously, again, being a smaller company, producing them at a smaller stage, our unit economics are quite different. So working with them and bringing on the companies that have the ability to purchase them while also understanding the value is kind of how we're approaching our B2B strategy. And yeah.
That's super interesting. You said lucky there, but it sounds like you're really tapping into a latent need. Like the fact that people are seeking you out and there is this alignment, like people are aware that there's problems here, but don't have a lot of solutions to really choose from.
Yeah, exactly. I think also the timing of it has worked out well because there's been a lot of advocacy around menstrual product accessibility, but also when this UC Berkeley study came out, we saw like search rates for all of our search terms like sustainable menstrual,
right.
compostable menstrual products like hit through the roof.
Right.
And so I think that people are becoming more and more aware of the products that they're using and trying to look for better alternatives.
Yeah, cool. So last kind of question here. On a personal level, what have been some of the biggest lessons that you've learned while building Aruna?
One thing that I was quite surprised by was the transition from like going from engineering into entrepreneurship. And I realized that for me, that was quite similar in the sense that you need to have like certain plans. You need to like do quite a lot of like milestone planning and like working towards these like milestones. And there's a lot of like systemic approaches too that you have to take as an engineer that you have to do as an entrepreneur too.
Right.
The one thing that they don't teach you in engineering is like the level of communication.
Okay, yeah.
I felt that entrepreneurship, you need to have much more higher levels of communication than you would as an engineer. And I think that was a really fun transition for me. I really enjoy like socializing. I'm definitely an introvert. So like after a networking session, I have to go back into like my room and like hide there for a couple of days. But
desensitize.
When I'm in the networking session, I actually love getting to know people and like meeting people. So I think that part of entrepreneurship really like helps me thrive individually. I also realized the importance of community, like in entrepreneurship too. I feel like I had never thought about that or had the opportunity to tap into that as an engineer. But in the world of entrepreneurship and like especially like Aruna, I've been so fortunate, like the Mars Women in Clean Tech group that you got to see pitch.
Yeah.
I honestly consider them family. Like I quite often like call them and like rant to them or like cry to them or like tell them about my life, and like it's great. I really enjoy that community and like being able to share your highs and lows with people that actually understand it, because entrepreneurship is very different. And,
right.
You can't really talk to people that aren't in the entrepreneurship world about it because they're like, what do you mean? Like, why? And I'm like, what do you mean you don't understand? So having that support community around you where it's like very like impact and like purpose driven and very resilient and like people understand the highs and the lows is also super important. And yeah, I think the other thing is the opportunity that entrepreneurship can bring too. As I've mentioned, I really didn't like working for other people that didn't align with my values, like doing work that didn't align with my values. And so with Aruna, I feel like I've really been able to bring like all of myself into it. I often joke that Aruna is just me as a company.
Right.
But yeah, I feel like just having that purpose-driven company where, you have this vision and you want to be able to work towards it, and you are able to, there's a lot of responsibility because now you're bringing people into it too, your employees, the people around you that work on it with you. It's really important to bring people that align with those values as well, and also understand the chaos that is a startup. A startup isn't, startup life isn't for everyone, for sure.
Definitely. Yeah.
Yeah. So making sure you bring on people that understand that see the impact, see the vision, and will work with you to get there.
Yeah. Awesome. We'll just close with a quick rapid fire, just a couple of questions. Don't need to put too much thought into it. Looking at the year ahead, what are you most excited about professionally, but also personally?
Ooh, professionally, I'm really excited about all of the partnerships and like actually getting into the world of sales, because this is the first time we're actually starting to sell now. And so scaling up the sales is a whole other beast. And I'm really excited for that. So I think that's going to be really fun because we've already started getting feedback about our products. And it's like, I can't tell you how excited I am by it. Like people are like, I haven't used a pad in over a decade and I just tried your pad and it was so comfortable. Like, I think I'm going to start going back to using pads. And like, we even have dispensers and we're doing our dispensers slightly differently too. And so, right now dispensers, there's like one in a bathroom, even if it has like multiple stalls. And so you kind of have to go there and like get one and then go into a stall. But we've created like this small dispenser that can go directly into the stalls. So we got a lot of great feedback about the dispensers too. And so, yeah, I'm just really excited for people to like try our product and get to know us.
Yeah, that's super exciting. What is a book, movie, podcast that you'd recommend to folks listening?
Oh, I think for folks listening, if you're interested in entrepreneurship, would highly recommend the book Scale Your Everest. It's a book about this like person that hiked Everest, but there's a lot of parallels between that and entrepreneurship, and he actually covers that too. And it's essentially like how to build a resilient mindset. I love it so much.
Very cool. Okay. And what's a piece of advice you'd give someone who wants to switch into this space, maybe wants to like start their own venture?
Don't think about it too much. Just go into it.
Don't psych yourself out.
Yes. I was recently at a spa and they had this like cold bath. And I realized that like, the moment I stood there and I started thinking about like, how am I going to do this? How am I going to do this in the best way possible so that I don't die? I couldn't go into it. But then when I was just like, I'm not going to think about it, I'm just going to go in, and I was able to go in. And when you're in there, you know what? Like it's scary. And a lot of the times you don't know what you're doing, but like you'll figure it out in just the way that your body figures out those cold baths.
Yeah. Perfect. And then any final ask that you would have for people listening?
Yes. So my final ask for people listening would be to check out our website, pre-order our pads, get involved with our community, and just to be mindful of like the products that you're consuming. And check out our Dragon's Den episode to learn more about us.
Cool. Rashmi, thanks so much for this conversation. This was really, really enlightening. Yeah, I appreciate you sharing your time with us.
Thank you so much for having me, Justin. I appreciate it.
Thanks for joining us. If you enjoyed today's episode, leave a rating and a review on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. It would mean a lot and helps grow the show. To stay in the loop on Canadian climate tech news, recent fundraising, job postings, events, and more, subscribe to the Climate Tech Canada newsletter on our website. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.